there is getting a lot of attention. Let's take a look at the front page of the International New York Times, talking about how there are few options for Kiev as this revolt, as the International New York Times calls it, spreads. Now, you can see a photo there of pro-Russia protesters in Slavyansk. Now, The Independent is likening all this to falling dominoes across the east, and reports from Horlimka, the latest city where state institutions have passed into the hands of separatists. Now, this article wonders, how spontaneous are these protests? And, well, it really depends on who you ask. And you can see a quote there from a 60-year-old resident saying, "I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen these men taking over the institutions. This was organized elsewhere. They've brought it here ready-made." But as I said, it really depends on who you ask. And there's another interesting article in The Independent by Mary Dejevsky, so a Russia specialist. She talks about how both sides in this crisis claim to have the truth. There's a huge gap in the perceptions on either side, whether you have a pro-European perception or a pro-Russian perception. And she says this not only applies within Ukraine, it applies elsewhere as well. And what this means is that what one side accepts as the truth, the other side calls propaganda or malicious lies. And these two narratives lead to a very dangerous situation, according to her. And to quote the article, she says it's all too easy to envisage civil war being triggered by mistake.
Okay, other papers not being quite as pessimistic, though.
That's right. There was one article I saw today that wasn't as pessimistic. This is in Slate. It says that contrary to appearances, the crisis in Ukraine might actually be on the verge of resolution. So why would Putin maybe stand down? Well, according to this article, Kiev is actually offering Putin what he wants without him having to send in his tanks in. Basically, the government wants to change the country's political system from a republic, where Kiev has a lot of power, to a federation where all the regions have a lot more autonomy. So that's one point of view. But what a lot of papers are saying is that, well, Ukraine is pretty much on its own here. I've pulled out a cartoon from the International New York Times where you can see that the U.S. has its hands quite tied. You have, well, hands and feet, really. There's John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, and you can see his hands and legs are caught in hunting traps. Now, they represent the Syria crisis, peace talks, nuclear talks, and the Ukraine crisis. Now, he's saying, yes, we can, but a lot of papers are wondering whether or not that's the case.
Now, a lot of focus in the papers as well today on yesterday's deadly bomb blast in Nigeria.
That's right. It's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, a photo of the aftermath of that deadly blast at that crowded bus station on the outskirts of Abuja. And as you can imagine, the regional press is also focusing on this. I've pulled out an article from the Observateur Palga that's based in Burkina Faso. Very graphic article about the aftermath of that attack, calling Nigeria a locomotive that doesn't stop derailing. So very pessimistic words there. Now, a lot of people, including authorities in Nigeria, immediately pointed the finger of blame at the Islamist group Boko Haram, which has staged previous attacks in Abuja. But Slate takes a closer look. What actually motivated this terrorist bombing, as it's calling it? Now, this article says that it's obvious to suspect Boko Haram, given that it has carried out very deadly attacks since 2009 across the country. But this article points out that both the United Nations and the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations are actually kind of accusing Nigeria, the government as well, of spreading violence in Nigeria.
Let's go back to the US. They're marking 1 year anniversary of the deadly Boston Marathon bombings, aren't they?
That's right. That was a year ago today. And there's a very touching article in the International New York Times today about two brothers. So you can see a photo of them here, JP and Paul Norden. Now, they attended the marathon last year to cheer on a friend, and they were both wounded in those double blasts. Both of them lost one of their legs in the carnage. So it's a very touching article about their struggle since, how they've slowly been rebuilding their lives. Between them, they've had 50 surgeries, and now they're walking, as you can see here, on those prosthetic legs. But as this article says, they really refuse to dwell on this single incident of violence. They don't want to be defined by it. And actually, they've written a book. It's called Twice as Strong. So they're getting a lot of media attention. They're taking advantage of it to thank all the thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who donated money to help them with their medical expenses, which they'll have their whole lives. But it's a very touching article. To quote the article, it says, "You realize what good people there are in the world, but you shouldn't have to wait for a tragedy. But that's what it took me to find out." That's what one of the brothers said. So tributes will be held in Boston today until April 21st. That's when this year's marathon will take place.
Nice optimistic end there from Flo. Thank you very much, Flo, with the international newspapers. Up for you next, of course, the latest news. Plus, we're going to be meeting the protesters of the Sunflower Movement in Taiwan. The movement recently occupying the Taiwanese parliament for 3 weeks to try to scrap a trade deal with China as they remain fiercely independent. And I'll leave you this half hour with some more images, shall we, of the latest lunar eclipse. Almost disappeared there, hasn't it? That's the lunar eclipse, the latest images being seen from North and South America.